Order at 5:35, this workshop on Monday the 18th. Roll call, please.
Councilperson White.
Present.
Councilperson Sostovny.
Present.
Councilperson Yon.
Present.
Councilperson Maples.
Here.
Councilperson Gill.
Present.
Council President Owen.
Here.
Councilperson Hawkins.
Here.
Councilperson Samuel.
Here.
Councilperson Rodriguez.
Present. All right, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. Mr. Merkley.
Yes. I know the topic of this workshop was for two resolutions that are on the agenda tonight in reference to expanding the Falls Landing TIF area and also the Intercity Road TIF area. The last council meeting, there were some questions for Brian Colton from Umbaugh & Associates, who is the financial advisor for the Redevelopment Commission. And procedurally, we have a new council member. Procedurally, in order to expand a TIF area, it requires not only Redevelopment Commission approval, but also the City Council's blessing. It's a three-stage process. The Redevelopment Commission has approved it at stage one. Actually, it's a four-stage process. Redevelopment has approved it at stage one, then it went to Planning Commission. Planning Commission approved it, then it goes to the City Council, and then, assuming if the City Council would approve it, then it goes back to the Redevelopment Commission for final approval and a public hearing. So I think there were some questions regarding some different scenarios that you wanted Ryan from Umbaugh to run through, and I think he's here with a report that he's handed out, and I'll turn things over to him, and I think also Rob Ways is here as well with Redevelopment Department.
Good evening. So, last time we left with kind of, you wanted us to take a look at, what if we assume no assessed valuation, looked at it, if it wasn't captured, if there was a pass-through amount, and then also the question came up about bonding capacity. So the handout in front of you addresses those different topics. So we'll just kind of jump right in and stop me if you have questions as we go through this. Just kind of big picture before we start looking at the different scenarios that are in the handout. Just a number of things that go into the assumptions, and then as each of these changes, obviously it changes the different scenarios, and so we run a few scenarios, but there is an endless possibility of different scenarios that we can run and different assumptions. So just, as we go through it, obviously assessed valuation is a big factor. How much is it? When does it hit? So that's kind of the timing that's also on this slide. Is it going to hit in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? If something starts today, you're not going to see any taxes probably until 18 at the earliest. And that's assuming they build very quickly. 19 is probably more realistic. So, that's a pretty long window just to start getting the TIF in. The numbers you see are assuming it's all in place at one time. So we didn't go through and say, what if 10% comes in each year? It's just once the amount of AV that you're going to see in the examples. Once it's there, what does it look like? Different tax rate assumptions, looking historically over the last 5 years with the tax rate, and what has it done? It's gone up some years, it's gone down a little bit. That's another item to take into consideration as we go through when you see the different scenarios that we have. Same thing with the levies. Those grow at a prescribed rate for most of the funds, and that number has been increasing the last couple of years and probably should still continue to increase unless we hit another recession and go backwards. But that factor should keep increasing over the next few years. And then legislation. That's the one that always is out there with property taxes, with the recent legislation with ag land and how that's going to be treated. Probably doesn't have a big impact on the city, but in other places it could, and that could impact the city's tax rate just by what happens out in the county. So just kind of different scenarios as we go through this. So the first scenario is assuming, and for the analysis, we assumed $150 million of assessed valuation. There's a few projects that are being discussed. That doesn't get to $150 million, but, it would be a large amount for out there, but as you know, last time we were here, they're talking about a hotel going in with $14 million of investment. So an area this big, $150 million, you can see that assessed valuation growth out there, probably over, obviously, a number of years and a number of developments. But I don't think it's far-fetched to think that, 150 million could come out there over time. If you captured it all as tax increment, it's about $4.7 million that you would get. It's about $5 million, but then there's $300,000 of circuit breaker losses if it all comes into the 3% category. So if it all came in as commercial or industrial, about $4.7 million is what the city could receive in tax increment, assuming you captured 100% of it. The second scenario assumes that $150 million of assessed valuation appears, no other AVs change, no rates change, no levies change. It's just poof, tomorrow you have $150 million of assessed valuation. What would that do? Assuming you didn't capture any of it, obviously you'd get $0 from tax increment. You're not collecting it for tax increment. And then we'll go through each of the columns. So the levy change, that's for the rate fixed funds that we talked about last time, the CUM funds, capital projects funds, where you have a rate, assessed valuation growth. You can capture additional, generate additional dollars. So that's about $18,000 for the city. The city would receive a portion of that benefit, Clark County would get a portion, and then the schools would get a portion. That's about $527,000 that would come in that regards. The next column is where you really get the bang, is with the circuit breaker reduction. With the $150 million, if it came in overnight, your tax rate goes down over 20 cents. Obviously, that's holding everything else constant, so in reality, would that happen? No. But, assuming nothing else changed, this is what the impact of the $150 million theoretically could be. So for the city, that's about $1.5 million that you would get in circuit breaker reduction if this happened. Grand total, about $3 million taken into account what the other units would get. And in this category, that reduction would impact many of the different taxing units. So other townships would get impacted, other schools would get impacted by the way the circuit breaker works. So that's about $3 million. So the grand total would be about $1.5 million to the city. In comparison to if it was TIF, it was $4.7 million. So that's where the trade-off is. Total for all the taxing units, about $3.5 million. So that's that, what if it all was thrown into the mix. That could be 10 years down the road, and you got all the intervening years there, but that's just, what if we put 150 in? Scenario number 3 looks at it a little differently, looking kind of at the history of tax rate increases. And in this scenario, what I did is I just assumed, what if the tax rate went up 1% each year for 5 years, and then the $150 million hit? So for the next 5 years, your tax rate went up 1%. Boom, you have $150 million. What happens? Basically, that 150 would offset that tax rate increase over the next few years. So this is just an example that depending upon when the timing hits, depending upon different factors, so the tax rate factor, that $150 million of assessed valuation may or may not generate circuit breaker savings. It may or may not generate additional revenues beyond the levy change. The levy change, that's held constant. You get that $500,000 because you'd have that new assessed valuation and those tax rates. But it's on the circuit breaker side where you're not getting that just simply because that rate would go up enough that it would be offset. So the 150 would help to offset that, so it wouldn't make circuit breakers worse perhaps, but you're not getting that benefit like you saw in the previous scenario. Just to kind of show if you start having, different factors in play, what starts to happen.
In scenario 3, did you, the current assessed value, did you increase that at all, or you just kept that the same?
For that, I just kept that the same, just to kind of show if you change one factor. And then in this scenario, over the last 5 years, some years the city has lost assessed valuation. The last couple of years it's gone up. But really, if you look at where you are versus 5 years ago, it's pretty stagnant. So this assumes that half the new assessed valuation of the 150 is going to offset potential decreases, and the other half of it is actually generating additional funds, and it's positive growth. So it's positive in the calculations. So in essence, The circuit breaker reduction column is half of what it was in scenario number 2. And so you're getting half that benefit from the 150. The other 75 million of that 150 pool that we're talking about, that's going to offset and mitigate the losses of that other assessed valuation, and then you're getting a positive from the other half of it. So just kind of another scenario just to show, how that assessed valuation may offset losses, but could also be a benefit. If you're still with me, scenario number 5. This is the one that assumes $150 million of assessed value and assumes that you capture 90% of it and then pass through 10% of it. That was one of the last items that we talked about at the last meeting. So in this scenario, you get about $4.2 million of tax increment, but then you also start to get some benefit. So some of those funds, the CUME funds, capital projects funds, start to receive additional monies. It also helps the circuit breaker slightly with an impact on the circuit breaker reduction. So in this scenario, the city would get $4.2 million from TIF and then an additional $150,000 roughly from small increase on the CUME fund, plus some circuit breaker reductions as well. So that's, and then, there's nothing magic about 90-10. It could be 95-5, it could be 80-20, it could be different. But just for the illustration, 90-10. And then this schedule just brings together to show what's the impact for the city of Jeffersonville. So it brings out from all the different scenarios, just kind of how does it impact the city of Jeffersonville for the different scenarios that we ran through. We can talk about that in more detail if you want, but that's really just kind of for your reference. And then the final schedule shows additional bonding capacity. This assumes it's 100% TIF. This assumes 150% coverage level, which would require a special benefits tax backup. Otherwise, probably 200% coverage would be required. As I mentioned, not knowing how long would it take for the development to occur, we built in 4 years from, say, a 10-year bond issue. We'd assume you'd actually have, out of that 10-year bond, only 6 years to be paying principal back. Under that scenario, you could do a bond of about $16 million. 15-year bond, 11 years of payback on principal, about $25 million bond issue, and then 20-year bond, about $32 million of principal amount for bonds. That's assuming that all the assessed valuation on that increment's really there after 4 years, which would be probably pretty aggressive. But just to kind of show if it did happen pretty quickly. So you'd also, you could establish it and then decide 3 years down the road, we start to have assessed valuation, let's go ahead and issue bonds then and do a 10-year. And that's why the 20-year would still be a viable option if you did it 3 or 4 years down the road. So those are just kind of some different scenarios that we put together. Anybody have any questions on those?
I don't even know where to begin to tell you the truth. Well, of course, when this was brought up at the council meeting, I had concerns of how this would, the impact it would to the school systems, to the county, that kind of, and then we discussed that if we do this, that we have, one of the options would be, I think hit on it, but kind of like we get X amount and we would give X amount to, I guess my question is, how in the world will we determine what to give, what percentage to give to, if we decide to do that, to the county, to the school systems, and whoever else is involved?
As far as the assessed valuation pass-through, it would be a decision that would impact everybody equally. So if you decide, or if the redevelopment commission decides we want to pass through 10% of the assessed valuation, city gets the 10% in their budget calculation, the county gets it, township gets it, school gets it. Each person would get that assessed valuation added into their calculation.
I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about if we decide we want to expand these TIF areas, but only capture 90% of the assessed value in a TIF. It is not the same. We're not actually collecting that money and writing a check to the school system and a check to the Clark County. We're actually, those monies will go through the normal procedure of being distributed through tax levy. Is there an option if we TIF 100% to then ourselves decide that we're going to give the school system $100,000 a year, the Clark County, $100,000 a year. Those are two different things. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what we're talking about doing. And I don't know if the second option is even an option legally.
Yeah, is that considered redevelopment?
There's
I didn't know if when we,
there's kind of a couple answers to that. I mean, one is there is a mechanism in place to help schools.
Uh-huh.
It's up to 15% on an annual basis. And I don't have it, I don't know if you have it, but there's a range of specific guidelines of what it can be used for.
Okay.
If you meet those requirements, you could do up to 15% for schools.
Who would have the ultimate say? When you say you could do that, who is the you in your sentence?
I think it's the redevelopment commission. I don't think that requires council approval.
So the redevelopment commission then could decide to issue 15% of the TIF revenues to the school system based on a set of criteria that's laid out in statute.
Correct. There's a different list of types of projects that are eligible for it.
Okay.
And will a change on the redevelopment commission perhaps dictate a change in the approach of giving that 15%?
It's an annual, it's not, you don't establish the area and you don't lock pass-through in, you don't lock in that 15% piece, because those are annual determinations that are made. It used to be July, now it's June 15th is when those.
So then even a pass-through,
Man.
if we decide if we're going to, TIF 85% and pass through 15%, that is also an annual determination
Correct.
by the redevelopment commission or by the council and everyone.
It's the redevelopment commission.
The reason, I brought this up at the last meeting, and the reason I did is because what I find is that when you have a change in the administration and a change in redevelopment, there's obviously a change in priorities. So we could set up what we'd like to see happen 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now. May or may not happen when there's a change of, there's an election and there's a change of redevelopment members and change of mayor and change of council. And I've heard over the years some great intentions that just never pan out. And I thought that this would be a good time to talk about sharing future revenues, future money that affects the county and the school, and do it before we create the TIF, and try to set up a situation where we are going to make an agreement and say, yeah, we're going to share with the schools, we're going to share with the county a certain percentage. I don't know how binding it is, but if we say as a fiscal body, this is something we want, and maybe pass an ordinance or pass a motion or some kind of legal action or some kind of council action to say this is what we want to see happen, at least future redevelopment commissions, I think, would be a little more willing to follow through on that, as opposed to just saying, we don't have to do it. And that's why I brought it up, is because I've seen good intentions not pan out, or just changes that happen, that a different change of philosophy. But regardless, the counties and the schools are affected. And so I think this is the time to have that discussion, say, hey, if the fiscal body says we would like to see this happen, let's try to make it happen and share those future revenues that affect those tax rates. Let's share those with the schools and the county.
So we could obviously make that recommendation, but in terms of what we are actually deciding as a city council is whether we're tipping 100% of this expansion area or not.
If there's a way to legally bind it, I would say do that. If there's not, then I'd say we just make a motion or show, make a recommendation to that effect, but still put it in the record that this is the intent. And then what happens, happens. But if there's a way to legally bind our ability to share with the county and schools, I say we do it.
I don't think there's a way to legally bind it, but I will. I'll wade into this.
I might be in the minority. I'm just sharing my...
The one thing to remember is any bond issue that the redevelopment commission wants to do, which I know there's pay-as-you-go projects, but any type of bond issue comes before the council. So, if you guys give a directive, you want it to be X, and the redevelopment commission decides not to do that, you always have, I'm not advocating any type of discourse or anything, but, if that's the directive, but unless you guys say something different, I don't think you can bind future councils and redevelopment commissions.
If you have a statutory right, a certain entity like redevelopment has the statutory discretion or right to do this on an annual basis. I don't think the fiscal body can force them by ordinance. You could certainly pass an ordinance or resolution to recommend or propose that they do this long-term, but I think it would be non-binding. I think the way I see statute, they have that statutory discretion on an annual basis to decide. And the point is, that as far as the two different things, having a pass-through percentage that would pass through to the other governmental entities versus physically writing a check, the statute only physically allows basically you to write a check to the school corporation, and it's a very limited purposes of the statute. There's nothing in the statute that lets a TIF district physically just write a check to other governmental units, such as county government or whatever. So that only applies to the school corporation. Now you can do pass-through to the other, the net assessed pass-through valuation, but not physically writing a check to say county government.
And you could do a county, if there's a county project that goes through the city, I mean, you could do something like that, interlocal agreements, we've had those.
Joint, yeah, it has to be a joint project, rather
Yeah.
than just giving them a blanket check.
Back to Kelly's question, what we're considering is whether or not to tip 100% of these areas or a percentage.
Correct.
Well, no, you're deciding.
It's all or nothing when it comes to us.
It's all or nothing.
All or nothing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's do you TIF the,
And then redevelopment decides.
What to do with it.
Yeah. Okay. Basically,
Can we make a change to the TIF plan requiring a certain percentage of money be used in future projects for the county or the schools? Because I know the plan has to be approved by the council in order for action to take place, if a certain amount of money is spent in a TIF. Is that a way to...
I mean, we have a TIF plans for actual projects, so the county and school. Of course, even if you did that, usually for school, it would have to be that particular purpose under statute. In the county, you have to actually know what project you're talking about. That has a joint benefit for both county. It just can't be a county project that's totally unrelated to the city of Jeff. You have their local agreement, there has to be some flow there. So if you do that ahead of time, if you don't know what the project is, I'm not sure.
Can you define it without defining the actual project? Has to be, fit the legal definition of a plan that benefits Jeffersonville? Kind of like what the tourism board does. I mean, they have to spend a certain amount of money in Jeffersonville and Clark County as part of their bylaws.
The problem is, I think the plan, in the statute, the plan has to be approved by the city council, redevelopment commission, not use money on projects that are not in that plan. So, I understand what you're saying. You're saying put in a plan to require projects to be done with the school.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not sure.
But that plan also is approved by the redevelopment commission first, right? Sent to the council.
yeah, that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I might have to do more research on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of.
I know we're going around, but let me tell you what, I was around when the intercity road TIF didn't generate hardly any money at all. And now it throws off, how many million a year? Do you know?
I've got the number somewhere.
I mean,
Yeah, 8 or 9.
yeah, $9-10 million a year. So it could be a substantial amount of money over a period of time. We could project 150 million, but it could be 300 million. It may not be, but it just could be too. And the next thing you wake up, and it won't be us. We'll wake up 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and go, oh my gosh, we got $15 million coming in. And the school's not guaranteed, or the school doesn't get any, and the county doesn't get any, and they're going to be complaining. And I don't know, I'm just trying to look ahead of, I think we're really going to grow as a community. I think that area is really going to grow. I think the assessed value is going to grow, and there's going to be some serious money there, and I just want to try to plan ahead as far as sharing those revenues.
Well, what about
Also
it?
important that, because the infrastructure is not sufficient at this point. So if we do get this investment and the money comes in, then we're able to properly invest in the infrastructure. And then once those projects are done, then that's a time where we can think about giving 10% here or 20%. I guess the question is, don't we have some priorities we need to put through and accomplish before we talk about sharing the money? And those, That
The
benefits
priorities,
everybody.
well, we don't know what the revenue's going to be, and we don't know what the priorities are going to be 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Who's going to be, running government, or what size of the school needs are going to be. I mean, you already hear the school needs money, you hear the county needs money.
Yeah.
I mean, and the city, I mean, we have resource needs too, but, we're growing as a community.
We're automatically talking about 3 or 4 years down the road before we see any of this anyway.
And we
So-
already have infrastructure that's outdated with the
Could
population.
it not be one of the options that, if that's some of our concerns, that maybe we just don't expand it as far? We don't take in all of this, maybe we,
But don't we have critical infrastructure needs that need to be
Yeah.
addressed? And I think that's part of the purpose of this, unless I'm mistaken, that we're able to bond so we can accomplish it.
Rob,
That's correct.
and also too, you are meeting with the future developers in a booming area. Are they already, is it my understanding that they already are asking for things through redevelopment, help with things in their development?
They are, yes. So one thing to keep in mind, though, on the intercity road, in 10 years, about half of that is going to sunset.
Actually, of the 8.7 million, all of it, but $1 million, which is in the gateway,
Okay?
piece of it goes away.
So about
2026.
90% of it's going to sunset. So by the time all of this gets up and developed, then that can kind of help us continue on with different projects that we've done in the past.
Arguably, when we get to that point, we could be taking in less than we're taking in now.
Well, you have to think, yes, and you have to think that whenever this sunsets, you're probably looking at about $300 million that's going to be going towards your assessed value, which is going to be huge. So
Be a huge
please
reduction of
keep
the-
that in mind, which nobody has brought that up
Yeah.
so far.
That's why we have security clearance.
So, and then I know some people say, hey, these areas, they're going to take off, they're going to go, it's a no-brainer. Well, that's really not the case. I mean, look at the port. Whenever the port came around, we had the intercity road down in that area. We helped it tremendously to make sure that it would work. Look at Veterans Parkway. Everybody thought that was a no-brainer. If it wasn't for the TIFs, we wouldn't have that there today. Everybody thought, hey, look, you know what? The Army's going to give us a ton of land. That'll work. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. It wouldn't have been a no-brainer without the TIFs. And just think of all the businesses and everything that we have gotten from those three areas. Not to mention, just think about what other things have we gotten through TIF dollars. Well, we've gotten Big Four Bridge, Big Four Park. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have had all the other restaurants, all the other economic development, and everything else that's happening in our downtown. We wouldn't be in this building today if it wasn't for TIFs. We wouldn't have our new police station if it wasn't for TIFs. We wouldn't have our new fire stations if it wasn't for TIFs. We wouldn't have New Hamburg Pike if it wasn't for TIFs. The school system wouldn't be getting the new signalized light there 10th Street and Thompson Lane if it wasn't for TIFs. They wouldn't have gotten Wilson School with the new entrance that we had there if it wasn't for TIFs. And honestly, I could go on and on and on because I wrote out a whole sheet of them, so I'm just going by memory, and you know how that goes. So there are so many things that there is no way, because I've sat in your old seat, there is no way that we could have funded or done a lot of these projects if it wasn't for TIFs. And keep in mind with, in 10 years, it's all going away, a majority of it.
To that
This will
point.
help us out.
To that point, do we know what the assessed valuation is on the property that is captured in that's going to sunset?
So like around 300 million.
You quoted
Yeah, it's
300.
pretty close to, so
And
that'll end up
this is
being,
on which TIF district?
be?
Inner city
Inner
road.
city road.
I don't think, I mean, TIF is a fantastic tool. I don't think anybody's arguing against a TIF. It's just a matter of sharing the revenues. That's my,
But
I'm
on
definitely,
sharing the
definitely support.
revenues, it's like, first, we need to figure out, okay, well, here's some revenue coming in, because as Brian said, it's not all going to come in overnight. And then what areas where do we need to help developers out in making sure that the projects are done right? That's my biggest fear. The developer can kind of go in, set something up, halfway do it, or use our help, make sure it's done right. I want to make sure that both sides of 265 and the other areas, such as up at Old Salem Road, are going to look fantastic, something that we're going to be proud of many years down the road.
It's about 250, 260 million that's going to sunset.
So a little less than half of what you'd projected here in scenario 3 will be coming into the tax rolls in 10 years. We talk about, $150 million dropping on 10th Street or 265 today. We're going to see that revenue maybe in 2019, 4 years from now, 3 years from now. That doesn't give us much crossover from this all falling off and that all coming on, in my opinion. And what's coming off is going to have a greater impact on the 150 million that we might or might not TIF now.
And it's going to be a huge impact for
So we're
the
gonna see it.
citizens as far as a tax break in 10 years. And then this is a master plan for River Ridge. This is the port road that basically runs through here. So this huge development in here, which I can see more development happening over here, is an area that we want to TIF, make sure that it's done right. We have this area over here that's going to be more growth. This over here is now the county. As this runs off, it's going to feed on down, and then it picks up over in through here, where then this gets back into the city for other types of development and everything that's going to be part of the heavy haul road. So it's a heck of an opportunity. It's going to be a heck of a loss if we don't jump on it. You have Utica right now, I read in the newspaper where they're saying, hey, we want a TIF, we got to make this happen, we want to make things look good. I'll be honest with you, if it wasn't for the sunset and everything else, then I could see looking at it maybe different ways. But with that happening, it's just going to stifle our area. And just once again, just think of all the projects that we have gotten done together with using TIF dollars.
Do we have other currently existing TIF areas that we could expect to compensate for some of that sunset? Like that are already in place that might, increase in assessed value? I'm just curious if we're going to be seeing that in,
What is
Not a lot of abatements rolling off. You don't have a high number of abatements in Jeffersonville, so it'd be some of the projects that they're going to locate in an existing TIF area, then that area would increase as well. But everything now is sunsets on it. It's just, is it in 28 or is it out in 32, further out?
When does the Falls Landing TIF sunset?
I believe it's 32.
So potentially we could see increased revenues there if more development comes downtown. We're not going to realize the newest development at Rose Hill School because we gave the UEZ abatement. But if there are other projects downtown that don't receive that type of abatement, then we could see some increased revenue there.
Yes.
But aside from that, most everything else is either in the inner city road or in the new area that you're proposing, right?
Yes.
What I think is very important is the bonding capacity increases. if these values realized, the bonding capacity goes up significantly.
And as we've talked about in other meetings, we're going to need a lot of that bonding capacity for some major infrastructure improvements.
Any other questions?
Nobody has anything for Mr. Colton. Dr. Mellon from Greater Clark Schools is also here. He had called this afternoon and asked to be able to speak for just a few minutes. He was made aware that we were going to be meeting on potential TIF expansions. So, Dr. Mellon.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, I believe in economic development. I'm a supporter of it. TIFs are part of that engine, and therefore I support most aspects of TIFs. But TIFs also have a tendency, property taxes that are paid inside the TIF stay inside the TIF, and they're there to pay for infrastructure improvements. For example, in River Ridge, the dollars that they generate stay in River Ridge to help with infrastructure improvements and enhancements. That's what the city is also doing. I totally understand and respect that. But there is also a negative impact on different governmental entities as a result of the TIFs. As those property taxes are staying inside the TIFs, then the tax rates for all other citizens have a tendency to increase. Last November, when we went to a referendum, there were 5 taxing units in the city of Jeffersonville that were already over tax caps with homes valued at $90,000 to $100,000. And so we had citizens in the city of Jeff that were irate about what we were asking for, and I can't really blame them because the impact of the TIFs raised their tax rates that they were paying individually. So there's a balancing act here. We want to support TIFs. We want to support economic development. We want to take care of those infrastructure improvements and enhancements. I'm not here to fight against the TIFs. I'm here to ask you to consider looking for some balances. 29, at the end of 2014, I think there were 29 TIFs in Clark County, number 4 in the state of Indiana. $710 million of assessed value were protected inside of those TIFs. There were cash balances in all of those TIFs, and this is all of Clark County, by the way, not just City of Jeff. But $25 million of cash balance that were inside of those TIFs. There are a couple things that you can think about as an entity. First of all, we want to partner as much as we possibly can. There are a couple ways to think about doing that. When I was in Valparaiso as a superintendent, the redevelopment commission up there, we had 2 school corporations that was inside of this TIF area. The redevelopment commission designated a percentage each year to each school corporation. So the first year we received $250,000. The second year it was $400,000. It was based upon a percentage designated through the redevelopment commission. They made a big deal of it. It was a check that was presented. It was a great partnership, and it went to enhance technology infrastructure inside of the school corporation back then. The town of Clarksville recently did a similar kind of thing, that we were looking for ways to improve our technology infrastructure. The town of Clarksville committed to $160,000 per year for 3 years as a result of our request. Whitley County School System was going through a referendum. This is another option that at least to keep in mind. They released assessed value from their TIF district to make sure that the tax rates for all the other citizens in that school corporation were reduced so that they could pass their referendum. So instead of a cash amount coming into the Whitley County Consolidated Schools, the redevelopment commission decided, let's help our citizens by releasing a certain amount of assessed valuation, therefore generating more tax revenue, and it decreased the individual cost to every taxpayer to pay for that referendum. And it passed. So there are many things to think about here. I'm not here to fight against the TIF. I think they have a valuable, they add a valuable convention to what cities and entities are trying to get accomplished. But there are a lot of examples all over the state of partnerships that have been established. Because what has been happening to us is that due to the loss of revenues from protected taxes inside the TIFs, it amounts to millions of dollars to the school corporation over time. And that's less money for us to invest in capital projects, transportation, bus replacement. The tax caps alone, probably close to $16 million of lost revenue in about a 5-year period. And so just so you know, we are struggling because of the legislation that's out there. We're not looking to get something that we wouldn't deserve. We're just trying to look for areas to partner. And because as a school system, as this area continues to grow and develop, we want people to be attracted to come here. We just can't have them come here for jobs. We want them to be able to live here, and we want them to go to school here. And the schools have to be an attractive component to draw people to our area, because if they don't, they're going to choose to live elsewhere, outside of the city of Jeffersonville, whether it's in West Clark, Floyd County, or most recently, 2 executives from the Port of Indiana last Christmas brought their families in from other parts of the country. Both families decided to move into Oldham County. There's been investment in their schools. There has been, they're one of the top performing school systems in Kentucky. So we didn't just lose out to them here in our area. They decided to go to another state. And I'm worried that if we don't partner together to try to help improve all of our facilities across the entire region, then people will make decisions to go elsewhere, to live and to go to school. We don't want to be the best place for people to work alone. We want this to be the best place for people to live, go to school, enjoy a high quality of life, and to work. And that, to me, takes partnership. So there are a lot of different options that could be explored, and it's my hope that that we'll be able to partner with the city of Jeffersonville to make this kind of thing happen. I don't know if you had any questions or...
Dr. Mellon, you quoted $700 million protected by TIFs in 2014. Does that include River Ridge?
Yes.
And so then the $25 million cash balance for those TIFs would include River Ridge, which I would imagine is a significant portion of that.
Yeah, those 29 TIFs are in the entire Clark County. So we're talking about Clarksville, Jeff, Charlestown, River Ridge. And again, not opposed to the TIFs, but are there ways to make sure that we can work together to make sure we're accomplishing all the different elements to improve our community as a whole?
I have a comment.
Sure.
It seems that this is a big decision. It's a 25-year decision that we're talking about. I'm glad we're talking about it and trying to figure it out. It seems to me that the Redevelopment Commission certainly has used the TIFs, and it's a valuable asset to them and the city for a number of things. It's been used for a lot. And it also, so they have a vested interest in this, and obviously the schools have a vested interest in this. Dr. Mellon's here tonight. I'm just curious about the thought, if we don't act on it tonight, if we would encourage the Redevelopment Commission and the school to get together and say, is there anything that you guys could come up with that would be a good workable solution? And that winds up showing the entire community that we're trying to play good in the sandbox together, and we're trying to be very cautious and concerned about our future. And then in a couple weeks or a month, we come back and find out, could anything be worked out? Because if they would come to an agreement, then I think if we felt like that everybody's being served in some capacity, it would be a pretty easy vote, I think. I may be wrong on that, but that's just a thought.
If you don't mind me adding, there are other taxing entities also that are impacted. And so this is a great time for our area to enjoy this economic development and growth, and we don't want to stifle that. I'm for one all for it. And I believe we're the talent development engine for this area. It's important that we step up, and we're doing everything in our power as a school system to help provide that. I think there are a lot of different ways to look at it. There are a lot of different ways to work together. And it is happening elsewhere in the state, and it's just a matter of sitting down and having a common agreement. I appreciate the work that's being done at Thompson Lane. That's going to be a great safety component for people exiting. I appreciate what's happened at Wilson as well. There, as the community continues to grow and expand, there are going to continue to be more important uses from a facility and infrastructure perspective for the schools as well. And so we would be open to any kind of dialogue and conversation to work together and do great things for this area.
Thank you, Dr.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
I have a question,
Rob.
and I'm sorry.
I just saw Rob's hand up.
I don't know if it's for Mr. Colton or Rob or the attorneys or who. Is there a mechanism in redevelopment or as a council that we can quote-unquote raise the base of the TIFs? I know there was legislation that was proposed before to raise the base of these TIFs, and I don't know if I know that didn't pass the legislature when it was last proposed, but I didn't know if there's anything currently on the books that allows for that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Mr. Weiss?
One thing to keep in mind is what Dr. Mellon said, and I didn't even think about it till he said it, was basically the legislation. Legislation hasn't been good for the cities. They haven't been for a long time. So you have to keep in mind that doing this is one way to make sure that we do have funding. If we do have extra funding, we can look each year about giving it to different entities. But just look at what's happened with the property tax cap. They've done, I'm sure Brian can tell us, countless other little things that they've done over the years that it's just tougher and tougher for the city to actually get their funding. So it's just another little thing to keep in mind.
One thing on that note is that when we met, Lisa and I met with Rob and Wendy Chesser and Matt Hall from One Southern Indiana last week on a different issue, and in passing they kind of mentioned that there was more legislation coming down the pipe at the State House that directly affected the ability to TIF that they saw coming in the next session, and not knowing what that means or what it could be does present a little bit of urgency on if we're going to do this or not. Not within the next few weeks, obviously, but within the next year or so.
And of course, I'm sure, Rob, that you and your department redevelopment, you are the director of redevelopment, you're open to working with the school system or any other taxing entities if they have
Yes.
projects.
Well, I think it shows we have in the past. I think both those roads at least was about a couple $100,000, that we helped out with. So, I mean, it's just not a small amount of money that we're talking about. And we were open to, I don't think there was any issue one way or the other on getting it done.
Thank you.
Well, and I'd like to piggyback on what Nathan said, and it doesn't sound like this is an immediate action that needs to be taken, because since we've been here, we've talked about all the things that are critical elements of developing our community, and we've had conversations about airports and River Ridge and roads, and knowing firsthand the budget crunch of Greater Clark County Schools, I think I know it is not underneath the umbrella of what we are charged to attend to, but that's the most or one of the most critical elements of our community. That's what people decide. Perhaps other people share a different view. I don't desire our community to become just a parking lot for other communities, which I'm afraid will happen if a cohesive effort is not put together to support the school system. So I would like to, and Nathan beat me to it, see a little bit of interaction. I would be happy with it before deciding with the redevelopment and with the school system, kind of getting together and see if there's a more creative solution that kind of protects them in such a way. And again, and I'm not against TIFs, and I'm not against this one, and I think other people have articulated that position very well. But I think would be great, and a great show in the community, as you said, playing the sandbox together. And if I understood you correctly, Rob, you would be okay with that as well.
Well, but honestly, and them two over there can tell me if I'm wrong, I think no matter what we say is meaningless, because it can change each year. So, I mean, even if we come up with this grand scheme of things and everybody loves it, it can change the following year. So,
Well, I agree with that,
so
but
I
at
don't
least if
see
you don't-
where,
But if you do that, at least the people who change it potentially pay a political price for that, where now there's no price to be paid by anyone.
well, the political price with, I mean, on well, I'm just being factual with you. There's nothing to hold anybody's feet to the fire. So, I mean, we could always say, hey, yeah, we'd love to do this or do that, but I don't see.
Next week that we're going to give 50% of the money to the school system, and next month, change it.
Yes.
Well, why
If
can't,
that's what they say.
Well, why-
That's why I'm just getting out of it, and I'm just being blunt, because, let's,
I mean, we
Well,
can't force the executive to do, that's the redevelopment department.
well,
Right.
why couldn't redevelopment pass a motion among themselves saying we support this and our goal is to spend at least 15% of revenues on schools? And then as time passes, if it happens, it doesn't happen. Hopefully at least they can reference that from time to time, say, this was the intent. And then if they don't, somebody can pay a political price or not for not following through on that intent and that motion.
I would probably say that if redevelopment did do that, they would probably say it would only be probably 10% of the new development in the new TIFs, because I don't think we want to go against the other TIFs, and we already have different things committed with those.
And for example, if I say just one more thing, it kind of reminds me of what we do with sidewalks. We as a council, probably 6 years ago, got a master plan for sidewalks and said our goal is to, especially after annexation, there was a lot of need for different sidewalks. We said, okay, we're going to set aside a certain amount of edit money for sidewalks. And we go and do it year by year, but it's been about 6 years now, and we're still setting aside $300,000 to $500,000 to improve sidewalks every year. And it just, I think if you put it in motion, it's easier to continue. And if you never put it in motion, it probably won't happen.
And then probably another thing that the council or redevelopment would want to do is, because I will probably tell them to do it, as a suggestion, is we would want to know how the money is going to be spent. So just as Dr. Mellon said at Clarksville, hey, it's going to be spent for laptops or this or that or something else. Because I still need to know a little bit more about how the school system works, because I know they tried to pass a referendum, it didn't pass, but then they're able to come up with the $16 million bond issue. So I don't know if that's just kind of separate, where it raises their tax rate within the school system. But it looks like there's other types of funding available for a school system that's different for the city. So I think we need to take that into account.
That's something that could be in an agreement if proposed or discussed, right? That
Yeah, we'll be more.
projects would need to be approved on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. And then to make sure it is something that's,
In the realm of,
it needs to be in the realm of economic development, dealing with the kids and moving in that direction.
Well, I'm sure with the current workforce development motion schools have, that will be an easy enough
So,
Well, but
Job for the
I
school.
agree, but I would think that is what redevelopment would want to focus on. So,
And
and that's where I think if we get the 2 or 3 to get, if we get whoever in that room to talk, they can kind of hammer out some of those suggestions and my thinking.
I mean, how many more times do we need to have Brian Colton come down, myself to come down? I mean, we know we need TIFs. We know we need to move forward. We will be more than happy to sit down and then sit with them, and if you guys want to recommend who wants to be part of those discussions, that's fine. I will be, along with anybody that wants to join us, along with probably a couple of members on redevelopment commission.
I think it seems like we're making this a little bit more complicated than it is. Like Mr. Way said, we wouldn't have all the things that attracted the businesses to River Ridge without the TIF districts. School Corporation has benefited from that. They have programs with some of the businesses out there, at least one, I think. Thank you. That is helping their educational programs. We have a fine school system. If someone chooses to move to Oldham County, that's been happening for decades. It's not because they can't get a good education in the Greater Clark County school system. There are other reasons that people do that. We don't know that what the actual amounts that will actually come in. We need to increase our bonding capacity. That is something that is not something we can wait on. Knowing that, and this realization is not even going to come immediately. So this is something we need to actually get on top of now. And I think we should just be mindful of jumping into the executive function. We have appointments to the Redevelopment Commission, and we're all free to attend those commission meetings if we would like. We're not going to have a decision on how the money is being spent. So I think knowing the obligations that we have, it only makes sense to TIF this, and if we want to lobby and do whatever with the Redevelopment Commission along with our appointments, then that's something we should do in the future. But right now, we know we have some things we have to do.
Thanks, Dustin.
I tend to agree with Mr. White that I'm all for addressing and having the conversation with the school district to see if there are ways that we can partner in greater depth. But the result of that conversation is not going to influence my decision on if we should expand these TIFs or not. I hope that we can, because I think that we should be good community partners. But this is, I think, a necessity for moving forward with not only the growth and the development of what is to come, but also in maintenance of what we've got and some of the struggles that we are currently facing that we really need to financially figure out. Dr. Mellon, did you have anything you wanted to add? And I saw you
Just
waving.
wanted to make sure that the Indiana code that I sort of referred to a little bit was Indiana Code 36-7-25-7. I can just leave this here with you guys, but it will stipulate the different options and opportunities that are available moving forward. Gives you an idea of how it can be used. And whatever agreement we'd have to come up with, it would be a written agreement, whatever that would look like. It'd be written and agreed to, whether it was a 1 year, a 2 year, whatever. It'd all be agreed upon by all the parties and mutually beneficial to everybody. So.
Thanks. I think it would actually have to be, they'll tell us, but probably year to year. Okay, all right. Makes it easier then.
Okay.
I'm sure I've missed a big part of the conversation. I apologize. I wasn't even aware of the workshop, but I will say this. I've had some debates with state senators over the TIFs. Pure and simple. Imagine River Ridge without the TIF. Imagine Veterans Parkway without a TIF. It wouldn't be there. If you don't put the infrastructure needs, paving roads, putting up streetlights, running sewer lines, doing sidewalks, if you don't have TIF dollars to do that, those businesses do not come. And Greater Clark greatly benefits from the thousands of new jobs that have come to River Ridge. They don't see it on the front end, they see it on the back end. Everything in the city of Jeff benefits when you get new employees.
Thank you, Mayor. Anybody have anything else to add? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Sorry.
Clarification.
Yes.
Do you need Mr. Colton back for your council?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Thank you, sir.
He's like, great, I can go.
Now I move to adjourn.
We release you.
Second.
So we could
Second.
adjourn until a council meeting?
Yes. There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We're adjourned.